Shirt.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. My guest today is a regular feature. Once a month, we do a Q&A together because you guys said you really enjoyed when he helped me answer the questions that were sent in. And after we get through the ones that are sent in, we're happy to answer any live questions. His name is Pierre. He is an amazing celebrity fitness and nutritional guru, but he's more than that as well. He has a nonprofit organization called livingwithharmony.org where he helps rescue animals, and he just does a lot of amazing things. He's the author of The Pillars of Health and Strong, Savvy, Safe. So please welcome JP to the show. Teresa says, yay, AJ and JP together again. Yahoo!
Thank you, AJ. Good to see you again. And thank you for all your amazing work.
Good to see you. You look very young to me. Maybe because I haven't seen you in a couple of years, but you look like you're getting younger. Hey guys. Hi, Christy. Hi, everybody. Hi, Katie. So we'll start with the questions that were sent in, and then we'll get to the ones from the live viewers. This is a question from Pam. Thank you, Azina, for collecting them, and I'm reading them from my phone. This is for JP. And maybe when you answer the question, you can talk about the whole thing because I think you're the one that invented this. She says, how long and what temperature does one use to dehydrate homemade hummus? I have an Excalibur, but maybe you could just talk a minute about how you thought about that idea and why it's great for air travel.
Sure. Well, that's a great question. And I wish I didn't invent dehydration, of course, but I've come up with some interesting ways to dehydrate food. And, since AJ and I, for the last, 10 years, and in some cases even more, have been traveling exclusively all the time, just constantly traveling. And with TSA having stricter and stricter, guidelines, we weren't able to travel necessarily with all the foods that we wanted. I've tried to travel with nut butters before, and, they're $16 a jar, and those get confiscated. And so you can't travel with liquids like hummus and gels. So I just decided, I use a lot of hummus. I'm just going to make a bunch of hummus and then dehydrate it. And all I basically do is I just make my hummus. So just get regular garbanzo beans, organic garbanzo beans, cook them in the Instant Pot, put them in the blender. I personally sometimes use tahini. You could use cannellini beans to thicken it. You could use a potato. You could use different things. And then add garlic and traditional stuff like lemon and some seasoning. And I just blend it. And then I just spread it on my dehydration trays. And I spread it fairly thin. And then I heat it at about 115 degrees. Now, it's no big deal if you cook it a little hotter. Generally, in the raw food community, when they're doing fruits and vegetables, they try to keep things at about 115 degrees. But it's no big deal. If you cook it at a higher temperature, it cooks quicker. And normally, I don't necessarily time it. I just look at it maybe in about 8 or 10 hours, and I just make sure it's crispy. So when I put it in my hand and I kind of rub it together, it should be a powder, and that's it. And then I just take that, let it cool, and I just put it in a glass container, and then that's my hummus. And when I get to my hotel, all I do is add either preferably hot water. And if you don't have hot water, you can add cold water. You just have to let it sit longer. But hot water, it should be ready maybe in 10 minutes easily. Cold water, it may take 20 to 30 minutes. And that's it. Now, some people actually have mentioned on our show before, I've never tried this, but they just take it, dehydrate it, and they sprinkle it on their salad that way, which is wonderful. I actually haven't tried that yet, but I think it's a great idea.
That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, I've traveled, I've gone to Turkey and Germany. I've been to India. I've been all over the place. And as you know, AJ and I bring our own food most of the time. So that's a great way to do it. But any dehydrator is fine. I mean, of course, I have the Excalibur and the Sedona. They're both wonderful dehydrators. If you can't afford a new one, look on Craigslist. One place you can find them also is at thrift stores. So I have a few of them and I lend them out to people because obviously I don't need to use two. I just wanted to try both of them out. The Sedona is really quiet and has the one that I have has a door. So when you open it up, or you can see everything without having to open it up. But I like my Excalibur too. So
what other things have you had success dehydrating that people might not have thought of? Because I would never have thought of dehydrating hummus.
Well, I just mainly do traditional stuff. Like I've done rice before. Rice works great. As a matter of fact, I just tried some of the rice that I had dehydrated a long time ago. I just cook it and dehydrate it. And then all you do again is add hot water and it plumps up. It's same thing if you take frozen vegetables and thaw them and then put them in the dehydrator and they get like a rock completely. The water's gone. And then I just add them to hot water and they store a long, long time. If you want them to store longer, you can vacuum seal them in a mason jar. They sell special tops that go on, or you can vacuum seal them in the bags. But I'd recommend putting maybe a paper towel, put them inside of a paper towel, because when you vacuum seal it, sometimes the sharp edge of the broccoli or carrots can puncture the bag. But I think I just do traditional stuff, just fruits and vegetables. Part of Living with Harmony, our organization, is all about what we call planet-based living. And so one of the things that we try is to get people to eat locally and not necessarily during winter have to be ordering produce that was grown in Chile or wherever it is, where it's a big carbon footprint. So like when I'm wherever I am, I'll go to farmers markets, and like sometimes people who have apple trees will donate tons of apples to me, and then I can just dehydrate them, and then I have them all the time. Or if somebody has an excess amount of fruit, they give them to me and I can just dehydrate them. So I just do traditional stuff. I'd say hummus and maybe flax crackers, just grinding up flaxseed, and you can add some seasoning and a little bit of water and some mixed vegetables. You can make a flax cracker or even a bread out of it. Those are things, but nothing too crazy. I'd say hummus is probably maybe the most unique one, but it works great for traveling. Wonderful.
When you said you dehydrate rice, you meant cooked rice, correct?
Yeah, I just cook it first and then let it cool. And then I just put it on the dehydrator trays and then just dehydrate it. And I just wait till it's basically crisp, and that's it. And then I just store it in a Tupperware bowl, a glass bowl. And I can take that with me traveling, because a lot of times, if I go to, like when you and I go to conferences, a lot of times I don't necessarily want to eat when everyone else is eating. That might not be my time to eat. I just don't feel hungry. Or, maybe it's, a lot of times when you're with a lot of people, they want to talk to you and sign books, and you're not very relaxed. So I like to bring my own food in case I want to just eat in the hotel or eat outside when I'm hungry.
I know what you mean. Anita says, does it deteriorate the nutritional value of the items that are dehydrated?
No, that's one of the reasons that a lot of people heat them or dehydrate them at about 115 degrees, because technically the lower temperature and the longer you go, that's kind of a safer way. But basically, when you're cooking rice, you're not really losing nutrients. If you do sweet potatoes, you're fine. Sweet potatoes work great too. Rice, of course, you're not. The only thing maybe there could be a little bit of loss is if you did fruits that were high in vitamin C. If you're using too high of heat, vitamin C is heat sensitive, as are the B vitamins, and you may lose some of them. But the convenience of it and the ability to have that and be prepared, it far outweighs the little bit you could lose possibly.
Absolutely.
And as many of you know, maybe Teresa will be able to put these up, but when the pandemic first started, I did a bunch of Zoom series. And one of them was on preparedness and emergencies. And I talked a lot about dehydration and having emergency foods available, especially for us in the vegan community or in UWL, where we consume a lot of vegetables and fruits. And if you notice during the pandemic, many times vegetables were not available.
Yes.
So it was very hard. I would go to the store and literally shelves at stores were completely cleaned out. I mean, bread aisles and beans and lentils, and they were completely cleaned out. But also the produce was very poor. And so, I always encourage people, especially if you're in Florida or where there's hurricanes, or as many people are seeing now, just because of the pandemic and all the issues we're having, there's food shortages. And they are predicting that there could be more food shortages. And fruits and vegetables, you can only freeze so much unless you live in a cold climate. So dehydrating them is a wonderful thing. Now, some people have they have freeze dryers. There's freeze dried vegetables and fruits, which technically are even better because they take out even more moisture. They could take out maybe 98 to 99% of the moisture. But they're very expensive machines. They're $3,000 or $4,000 machines. I personally don't have one of those, but I do have some fruits and vegetables that are freeze dried. So hopefully that helps answer your question. I know AJ had to go take a call, but she'll be back in a minute. A couple other things I just want to mention. I know I don't know what all the questions are. All that it sounds like new ones came in, but AJ did say we had some questions to fitness questions. So I just want to talk a little bit about what I'm seeing during the pandemic. This has been a hard time for everybody. I mean, even people who are wealthy, it's a hard time psychologically, but for most normal people, it's a hard time psychologically and then financially. And what's happening is we're building up a lot of stress. And if you could imagine stress kind of it's almost like a vegetable being cooked in an instant pot or a steamer. There's so much pressure being built up in there. And so that's what's happening to the body. There's a lot of tension, things that get built up in the body. And so you need to make sure that you can dissipate that stress. And one of the easiest ways to dissipate stress is through movement. And again, you don't need to be some sort of superb athlete or anything. I'm just kind of an average, person. I don't consider myself a super athlete or anything. So I just make sure that I walk the animals a little bit more than I normally would because I'm not out moving as much. So maybe instead of 2 walks a day, they're going to get 3 walks a day. Maybe go for a walk with your friend and talk a little bit. Make sure to keep your house super clean. So you're getting in that squatting, the bending and moving a little bit. Get some exercise bands and some weights and kind of sprinkle them around the house. So when you're in the kitchen, you go, yeah, I'm going to do a couple push-ups off the counter. When you're done using the restroom, I'm going to do 10 squats off the toilet. You have to sneak these movements in if you don't live an active lifestyle. If you work as an old-time farmer, where they get up at the crack of dawn and they're still working till the sun is just setting, they didn't come home and say, honey, I'm home, but before I eat dinner, I'm going to go to the health club. I mean, they were doing manual work all day. And so when you do physical manual work all day, yeah, you don't need to sneak it in as much. Those people then need to sneak in more restorative things like yoga and foam rolling and massage. But for most of us during the pandemic, it's more sedentary. We're not getting in the little steps that we used to. We're not getting in the movement that we used to. And of course, many of us have our health clubs and gyms are closed. So if you didn't have exercise gear, or you relied on a personal trainer, or you relied on a group exercise class, it's a little harder to do at home unless you're going to watch videos, which is fine too. I mean, I created 3 different exercise videos that's on Healthy Human Revolution. And I put those on that Healthy Human Revolution site because there was a request for it. People said, can you show us how to use bands? Can you show us balance training? Can you show us jump rope? Yeah. So there's little things that you can do throughout the day that don't cost you anything. There's lots of free videos online. And if you want, then you can buy, subscriptions to videos, or you can buy my videos if you like what I do.
Right.
Okay,
well,
I see you're back, AJ.
Yeah,
I just went and talked a little bit about.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I don't usually leave my own broadcast, but you did need to take that. And it's interesting because I just recently interviewed Dan Buettner, who wrote the Blue Zones, and they don't have gym memberships.
Right. Yeah, Dan is a great guy.
And either the Amish people don't have gym memberships too. But didn't you say they get like 50,000 steps a day or something like that?
Yeah, it depends on the men can get about 18,000. Yeah, and they live active lifestyles. And if you look at ancient cultures, or even people in our era, look at the Okinawans. I mean, they live some of the longest in the world, and they're 80 and 90 and still carrying buckets of water and chopping wood. So under no circumstance do you need health clubs unless you're really trying to like bodybuild. You're trying to that is something you may need a health club, or you're an athlete and you're looking for some specific movements or skills to develop. But to be normal and healthy, you don't. As I said, the best thing you can do is go get an animal, particularly a dog or cat. But if you get a dog from the shelter, that dog requires movement and needs to be taken out 2 to 3 times a day. And what a beautiful way to get movement in. That's kind of what's kept me moving quite a bit, is just taking the dogs for a walk 2 to 3 times a day for sure, because I know they need it. And it's a great way for me to sneak in a little bit more movement since I'm not moving as much as I was.
Right. And if you can't have a dog, then volunteer at a shelter and walk those dogs because they're locked up all day and they really need it.
Good point. Yes.
Yep. So we actually have a couple more questions on the dehydrator, and one is also from Pam. This one is for me on the recipe in my book, The Secrets to Ultimate Weight Loss, the Pumpkin Pie Bites. How long do I dehydrate? Because she wants to hand them out for Christmas. And then I'm going to take the live question from Vicky and answer it, because this is basically how long to dehydrate. Vicky says, how long does it take to dehydrate fruits, hummus, etc., 4 hours or overnight? So JP can give his opinion, but see, my opinion, at least what I learned in culinary school, because I went to Raw Culinary School, is there's really no exact time, because everybody likes things dehydrated a certain way. So if you like things like really, really, really well done, you can crank it up as high as you want. I believe dehydrators go to like 140 or something like that. I'm not a raw foodist, so I don't worry about like destroying the things. And the longer you dehydrate it, the crisper it's going to get. But it also depends, on where you live, because believe it or not, the temperature where you are, the ambient room temperature, will make it take a longer or shorter time. And so I just take it out when I feel like it's ready, and I'll taste it. The thing is, it does crisp up more as it dries. So I don't think I have an exact answer to how long you dehydrate things. So Pam, for the starch cookies, what I do is I usually dehydrate them for at least 8 hours on one side. And then when they're dry to the touch, I flip them, and then I let them go as long as possible because these are things I'm using for travel. So I want to make sure there's no moisture so that they'll last a long time. Do you have a time that you estimate for how long you dehydrate, like fruits and vegetables, JP?
Well, you made some good points about elevation and things like that. The other thing is how thin you slice the fruit or vegetable, especially if you're slicing things like mangoes, watermelon, and things like that. The thinner you slice it, the quicker it'll dehydrate. The thicker it is, like sweet potatoes. If you're making sweet potatoes for your dogs, you want them to be a little bit chewy for them. So I kind of like them to be thicker. But here's the main point. It really depends what your goal is with dehydration. If you're dehydrating to have like a typical mango, dried mango that's kind of bendable and chewy, well, then you know that's short-term storage. So if I'm going flying somewhere and I'm going to be back in a week or two, yeah, that's perfect. But if you're trying to dehydrate food for emergency storage, then the more water that you can get out, the longer it's going to last. That's why freeze drying fruits or vegetables removes almost all the water, let's say 98, 99% of the water. And those things last, 20 or 30 years easily because there's no moisture. One of the main things that contributes to food degradation is light and heat. And of course, a moisture too, and microorganisms. So you have to keep things clean, but it really depends. Normally, I think what most of everyone here wants to do is you guys are just trying to dehydrate food to take on a trip or to enjoy, it can have moisture, it can be bendable. But when you find something that's not as bendable, then it's going to last longer because more of the moisture has been out. I don't really have a set number. I just keep looking in the dehydration, the dehydrator I start looking at it maybe about 8 or 9 hours. And then sometimes I'll flip it. Like with the hummus, a lot of times I'll just take a spatula and I scoop it and I see, the bottom's a little bit moist, and then I'll flip it. It also depends if the trays that you use have holes in them or not, because many trays are, they almost just like a sheet of plastic. There's no holes. That's going to take longer. But if you have trays that have holes in them, then air can come from the top and from the bottom. So I hope that makes sense. But, take a look at the Zoom series that I did. Teresa, if she's watching, she'll post it. I think it's johnpierrewellness.com. There's 2 different Zoom series. We go over quite a bit about emergency preparedness for vegans and for anyone in general.
You know what, JP, I would love to get a food, not a dehydrator, the freeze dryer, but those are thousands of dollars, whereas a dehydrator is just hundreds of dollars.
Well, if that, you can also go to thrift stores and Craigslist, and many times you can find them there. For sure. I've seen them at thrift stores all the time. They're not the #1 quality, but they still work. I mean, dehydration was used thousands of years ago. I mean, people were dehydrating things just out in the sun on rocks. So you don't need to have a $500 dehydrator. Yeah, I just happen to have 2 nice ones. And what I like is I can lend them out. I really like turning people on to, making some dehydrated stuff. And especially if people have apple trees or fruit trees, then it doesn't go to waste.
Howard, who's in our UWL group, he has a freeze dryer, and he takes my recipes like the red lentil chili and the black bean mushroom chili, and he freeze dries it. And then it's just like, isn't that amazing? Like you can use it for camping and travel. It's so cool.
That's nice. That's quite a privilege to have that because I know they're expensive, but it would be nice to have one.
Absolutely. So here's a question for JP for Louise. Any suggestion to help motivate high school students to be more active in their community, as well as being more physically active during the pandemic? I teach and mentor students virtually, and they are not getting fresh air. They don't go out at all. They eat crappy processed foods, and some don't leave their beds all day. They're exhibiting anxiety, depression, a lack of awareness how privileged they are. I'm running out of ideas and pep myself.
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I started vegan when I was in high school, and I did it for ethical reasons because I didn't want to cause any harm to animals or the earth or to people. And then I became quite an activist on it because I was so motivated not only to help animals and the planet, but also humanity. And I think if there's a new documentary that I just saw, I don't recall what station that is, if it's Netflix or Hulu, but it's on the Greta Thunberg. She started so young doing her activism. And if you watch it, it's amazing because she just started, sitting out, outside with a sign. And then hundreds and hundreds of people eventually start following. And then it turns into thousands and hundreds of thousands. The kids today should be looking at what's happening today, whether it's politically or environmentally, and say, my gosh, this is our future. We're 15 or 16 years of age. What's the planet going to be like? What's politics going to be like? What's our world going to be like in 15 years? So hopefully that would motivate them a little bit. They should also watch a documentary, a couple of them. Earthlings, of course, is phenomenal. Cowspiracy is another really good one. Those are on TV or Netflix or whatever you have. Those are good. But I think that documentary on Greta was really good. In terms of motivating kids, you have to make things fun. I'll never forget the time I had a boy come in the office. He came in with his two parents. They walked in. I was taking notes, and I saw them walk in, and I thought it was three adults. But he was in the middle of them. And when I looked up, this boy, I ended up finding out he was 12 years old, 270 pounds. He was a man-child, diabetes, heart disease, you name it. But the thing that he had the most of was a horrible self-esteem. When he sat on the couch and I was talking to him, he looked down the whole time. Immediately, once that started, I said to his parents, let's go out in the hallway. And I got a balloon and I blew it up, and we start having to hit a balloon back and forth and moving. And the kid turned alive because I got him moving. I had him doing things that are fun. Most kids don't want to sit on the treadmill or do some weight training. That's not fun. But put a racket in their hand or a ball, let them have some fun. I've since changed using balloons because from an environmental standpoint, but I do use beach balls that I can blow up with air, and I can use those in retirement homes and keep reusing them. I also use bubbles with seniors and with kids. And then if I'm working exclusively just with kids, I really use a lot of things that are game oriented. So a lot of ball games, a lot of things like badminton, tennis, soccer, get kids moving, but it has to be fun. And also make a game out of it with, you could say like, how many times can you juggle? Let's count and then let me try and, have the whole family get involved. But one of the saddest things that we're seeing today is what's happening with children. Even the military has had to lower their standards of fitness to allow young men and women into the military because these folks are not fit anymore. And part of it has to do with our society that is really they've kind of engineered movement out of our lifestyle. So we don't need to move as much, and it's detrimental to the body and the mind. So hopefully those suggestions will help.
Yeah. Christy's suggesting hacky sacks. Kids like those kind of things.
Absolutely. Hacky sack is one of the best things because we don't use our lower limbs enough. And as you get better, you can start playing barefoot, which is one of the best things that you can do is to go barefoot and get used to grabbing things with your feet, your toes, like marbles and hacky sacks.
Yeah, you don't want to go barefoot here when it's 120, though. I can tell you that right now. It's a joke, JP.
Yeah, well, I get it. Well, I'm in Colorado right now, so I don't get to experience that. I wish I could a little bit.
Here's a recipe from Kaylin. You use Dandy Blend in a recipe. I'm not sure if I have a gluten sensitivity. However, I do eat SOS free for autoimmune disease. Is it worth it for me to try Dandy Blend if I want to place it in place of my morning herbal tea? So I actually don't drink coffee or drink Dandy Blend, but I was trying to make a recipe that was like a frappuccino. And so I have one recipe. It's a variation of the date shake, calls for 2 tablespoons of Dandy Blend. And I turn it into like popsicles. And then you're getting about 1 teaspoon of Dandy Blend or maybe less per popsicle. So I was very concerned when I first tried the product. I wrote the company and they sent me back and they said, I'll find the email in 1 second. And they swear that it's been tested and that it's gluten-free. The first time I had it, I thought I reacted, but I didn't know if it was like psychological. I don't have it very, very often, but when I wrote Dr. Goldhammer asking him, and I sent him all the stuff about it, he basically said, okay, so the company said, how can there be no gluten in Dandy Blend if it contains barley and rye? It does not contain barley and rye. It contains the water extracts of barley and rye, and that is a big difference. Gluten and gliadin proteins are not water soluble. That means all gluten and gliadin are left behind in the grounds and get thrown away, usually composted. We test for gluten and gliadin using the ELISA test accepted by the FDA and Health Canada. The results always show that there are less than 5 parts per million of both in Dandy Blend. Standard in both countries are that 20 parts per million or less is considered gluten-free. A copy of the test results are posted on the company website. And so I sent this to Dr. Goldhammer, and here's what he said about it. You're going to love his answer. He said, as you dive into these highly processed, chemicalized food byproducts and additives, trouble likely lurks in the future. The best would be to focus on the use of whole natural foods. So that's what the hammer says. What do you think, JP? Do you think the use of Dandy Blend is safe in moderation, especially for people trying to get off coffee?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I think we have a lot of disagreement in our movement about coffee and tea. You have, let's just say, 50% of the plant-based doctors recommend it for the antioxidants and caffeine, and the other 50 don't. And same thing with nutritional yeasts. And I think, I mean, it depends how strict you're going to be. I have a tendency to have shades of gray with clients. If they're trying to get off coffee for whatever reason, let's say they have high blood pressure and they're using that, I don't really have an issue with it. I'm not going to be that strict with people. Most of my clients don't need to be that strict. So
I hear you. I don't know if you caught any of the GI Health Summit, JP, but since, even though you do much more than fitness, you're known as the exercise guy. I was not aware that exercise has such an unbelievable impact on the microbiome.
yeah, there's so much more and more research coming on about that. I didn't get a chance to watch it, but I would like to. And, it's interesting because many of the health practitioners, even in the natural hygiene movement, have been talking about the gut biome for decades. And only now is it starting to get more and more media coverage, which is great. And it's something, though, that we really need to get back to looking at.
Oh, JP, there you go. You went away, but now you're back. Perfect. So,
but anyway, so yeah.
Here's a question from Heidi. Chef AJ, thank you for your marvelous GI summit. Most of the GI doctors are suggesting not to be gluten-free unless you have celiac disease. I love the ultimate weight loss way of eating. What do you guys think about still remaining gluten-free when you don't have celiac disease after these suggestions? Do you think we should be adding in glutinous grains for our health? So the reason I don't eat gluten is because I have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and Dr. Goldhammer says not to. So he's my personal doctor. And so that is why I don't eat gluten. And I know that I react to it very badly because I didn't have the test for celiac, but I had it. I tested it. This was in, I think, 2012. I went completely off it, and then I ate some barley, and I didn't even know there was barley in the soup, and I got very, very sick. So I avoid it. But here's the thing. The two dietitians on the summit who actually have celiac, they said, not that you should avoid gluten or need to, but there is nothing wrong with it, even if you don't, as long as you're eating enough wide variety of whole grains. There's enough whole grains in the world that if you decided not to eat rye, wheat, barley, oats, couscous, triticale, farro, there'd still be like hundreds of grains you could eat. But the reason that we avoid gluten for people that are food addicts comes from the research of Dr. Joan Ifland, who wrote the book Sugars and Flours Make Us Crazy, Sick, and Fat, and from Dr. Erwin Linsner, another doctor at True North. And there is a podcast you can find on my YouTube page with both of these where they talk about, for people that suffer from food addictions, gluten, when ingested, turns to gluteomorphine in the brain, the way that casein, when it's ingested, turns to casomorphine. So for people that struggle, these are not good for these people. So that's why I tell people with food addictions to avoid it. And I avoid it personally, mainly because of my hypothyroidism. So what say you about the glutinous grains, JP?
Well, I think one of the main things to take a look at is the decades of hybridization and genetic breeding that we've had. It's kind of similar to what, unfortunately, they've done to cows and animals, is they've genetically altered them. And with particularly wheat, the amount of gluten in there is astronomically high compared to what it used to be, especially if you look back into, say, Persia, or you get ancient wheat berries like kamut. These have very lower concentrations of gluten compared to what you see today. And many times people are affected negatively by the high concentrations. It's kind of like the difference between eating some date paste or date sugar, let's say just dates, and then eating an artificial sweetener that's hundreds and hundreds of times sweeter than sugar. It's the same thing with much of the wheat that's been genetically made. It's so much higher in gluten, and that's what negatively affects people. Plus the pesticides and the glyphosates, all these different chemicals that are used on it are a problem. And then my main question is, what specifically are you eating that's wheat? Because most people, if they're eating wheat, it's going to be bread or cookies or cakes or candies or noodles. And in UWL, those aren't foods that we're really recommending. We're trying to get people to avoid those foods. And there's so many different grains to eat. And I do think grains have a place. Fruits and vegetables are really high in water content, but grains are really one of the highest sources of fiber. And along with beans, getting that for the gut is really important. So, it depends what works for you. But I don't think there's any nutritional reason that somebody needs to eat wheat. No.
Yeah. And she could also try and see. I don't know any research that says you live longer if the whole grains you eat have gluten. Maybe Brenda Davis would know. The thing is, she could always try and see how she feels eating them.
Yeah, I mean, it's just basically one of the proteins in there. That's all. So it's just a source of protein.
Yep. Well, great. So this is a question from Beth. JP and AJ, could you please address how we might deal with feelings of sadness and upset relating to the fact that our loved ones are fat and sick and not interested in learning about this way of eating? I do not lecture, I promise. I work hard to bite my tongue and not be pushy, and yet I am rather anguished to have the knowledge I have gleaned over the last few years of my own health journey and want nothing more than that for my loved ones to at least give it a try. My sister is about 100 pounds overweight. My mother has ovarian cancer. My brother is a bit overweight and just became a first-time dad in an older age. I want them all to be as healthy as possible. While our way of eating does not guarantee health, it certainly improves our odds for healthy outcomes. It's so painful knowing this information and not being able to really help in a tactful way.
Well, my gosh, for so long, I've worked with kids who have had eating disorders, drug issues, alcoholism, self-cutting, self-harming, a lot of behaviors that are destructive. And it's very difficult for the parents and the loved ones because you love your child, you love your mom or your dad or whoever it is, your friend, you love them. But ultimately, all you can realistically do is provide information to people. And that's the best thing you can do is recommend documentaries or books. I always tell people for Christmas or Hanukkah or whenever you're giving gifts, try to give an educational things like Forks Over Knives or Cowspiracy or something that will educate people, or one of the vegan doctors books. Sometimes if it's someone in your family, ask if they'd be willing to sit down with you and watch this and explain to them in a loving, non-judgmental way how this information has changed your lives. But I know it's a tough situation because you so desperately want your loved one to change because you see them killing themselves, eating themselves to death or drinking themselves to death. But realistically, what can you really do? You can only harp on them so long, and many times they're just going to turn you off, or depending on the trauma they've had in their life, they may just go against you and do that negative behavior even more in spite to spite you. So all I could suggest is continue to educate and be loving and try to meet them where they're at.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, Beth. And I know you've been in Mastery, and if you have access to those videos, I remember Dr. Lyle talked about this once, but the shorter answer is there is nothing you can do. What's that old saying? A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still, unless they're like minor children under your control. What can you do? I saw, that's why I do this, because all my family died from preventable diseases. My brother, very young, a medical doctor who was #1 in his graduating class at Princeton. He was a food addict. And my mom and all the other people in my family that died because they had to have salami or whatever. It's difficult, and especially if you love them. But here's the thing: even people that really want to do this have trouble. So you can't convince somebody that's not even interested. And I think food addiction just clouds people's common sense and judgment. And the thing is, because the rest of the world, it's like we're living in this weird world where this is what has become normal, to be fat and sick. And then those of us that are healthy and slender are being criticized because there's something wrong with us. So I don't know what to tell you. Just surround yourself with as many like-minded people as you can to help cushion the sadness for that. It is sad. I get that. And it's like the old joke, how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? One, but it's got to really want to change. And, you can just let them know you're here for them. I mean, one of the things I've said to other people that you can do is when they want to do something for you, like, for example, say, what should I get you for my birthday? Your birthday? What should I get you for your anniversary? Say, I just want you to sit down with me for 87 minutes and watch Forks Over Knives or Game Changers or something like that. But you are in a very tough situation that so many people are in, and these are their children and their spouses. And I wish I had a better answer. If anybody watching has advice for Beth, I don't know, just
AJ, one of the things I'll say, I've worked with clients for over 35 years, and I can tell you my most successful clients who have lasted the longest, the one thing that they have in common is, one, they love themselves, or they've learned to at least love themselves. And two, they've constantly keeping themselves updated. It's like, you're constantly doing the summits, you're constantly learning, you love yourself and care about yourself. So it's about constantly educating yourself and getting this information in and in and in, and also caring enough about yourself that you don't want to harm yourself. And that's one thing I've always told my clients: if you love yourself, you don't hurt yourself. If you love your kids, would you hurt them? And 100% of my clients say absolutely not. I say, well, why would you hurt yourself? And whatever their answer is, I'm always saying to them, you just need to learn to love yourself as much as you love your kids, because what I teach is ahimsa, which is compassion and reverence for all beings and all expressions of life. So to me, everyone is equal, whether it's an insect or an animal or a human. It doesn't matter who they are, they're all equal. If we could just learn to see the beauty in everyone, including ourselves, we'd have a totally different world today.
Right. One of the psychologists on the GI Health Summit, Dr. Jeffrey Lackner, said one of the things he learned in school was to accept the patient where they are, not where you'd like them to be. And I guess we have to do the same thing for other people.
Yeah, that's the hardest thing in the world to do for most people with family members, though, because obviously they love them so much and they don't want to see them suffer, because they know not only do they not want them to suffer, but they know when that family member suffers, they're going to suffer also.
Yeah, too bad. Sorry about that, Beth. I wish I had a better answer, but I don't think there is one. But it'd be a good, Dr. Lyle will be on the 15th if you want to re-ask that question. Colleen says, in the past year, I've gained 35 pounds. During this pandemic, I've developed what is likely a shoulder impingement. Got one. It's terrible, painful. Sorry about that. A trigger thumb. Got one. It's like we're twins. And I just broke my toe. That I do not have. I really feel defeated right now. My diet has suffered and taking walks is out of the question right now. What's the best way to deal with discomfort and defeat and still reach my goals?
Well, one of the main things is first identifying what your goals are, what specifically they are. Getting rid of pain obviously is going to come quite a bit in your diet to make sure you're on a very anti-inflammatory diet, which is what we teach in UWL, of course. Lots of fresh fruits and vegetables, particularly berries and pomegranates, and making sure you get some good fats in your diet, whether it's ground flaxseed or some walnuts if you're allowed to have it. And stay away from foods that cause inflammation, which of course would be animal products and oils and processed foods. But you do want to make sure that you're trying to set goals for each of those body parts that may be hurt, whether it's a shoulder impingement or trigger finger, making sure you're getting some physical therapy, if you're able to do foam rolling or particularly massage, many times contrast baths. So with your finger, hot, cold to increase circulation, and using something like Beet Boost is good, because there you're dealing with 40 tart cherries and 4 beets per tablespoon. And the beets cause a vasodilation. They cause the arteries to open up, which increases blood flow. And then the tart cherries reduces inflammation dramatically. So it's mainly, a lot of that is in your diet. And a lot of it has to do with having the right mindset that this too shall pass. So the body has a miraculous way of healing itself as long as it's supplied with the right tools. It's kind of like a construction team. They can build a house as long as you supply them with the proper equipment.
Yeah. So Colleen, for trigger thumb, I mean, right now it's not active, but I went for something called occupational therapy, which is like physical therapy, but just for the thumb. And I have this brace that I can wear when it acts up. I have these adapted tools, like these spongy things you put over pens and writing implements, and lots of exercises they taught me that I can do. So there's lots of things you can do to make the thumb feel better. And then just instead of using knives, chopping things in the food processor. Shoulder, that's probably going to take some physical therapy. But what I would say is that you didn't gain the 35 pounds when you had these 3 orthopedic conditions. And so you can't, you can say, well, I can't exercise now. But the thing is you didn't have these when you gained the 35 pounds, meaning, in other words, like Dr. Furman says, you can't outrun your mouth. So you can, like JP has a great story about Shada, who's been one of the most successful people ever in the history of UWL, who's kept off 120 pounds for 8 years now. She couldn't exercise for a year and she still was able to lose weight and have some of the hardest workouts of her life. Remember, JP?
Yeah, she was in a boot. And so I didn't let that boot stop her. I said, well, that's only one body part that we can't use. So we still have 98% of your body we can use. And then I ended up using that boot to build up certain parts of her body. I would actually put her on her stomach and have her do leg raises. So she was working her glutes that weren't firing because of the boot. So we did lots of stuff. But again, her diet was tight. And, it's a hard time for anybody. And you just try to do the best you can and don't beat yourself up. But remember that it's important to have some socialization, whether it's on FaceTime or Zoom or talking to friends. Keep motivated, keep inspired, understanding that this too shall pass. Whether you have a religious belief or a spiritual belief, those are very important to implement in your life on a daily basis. Being around animals that you can love and they give you love back, and being around people that support you, those are very important parts of healing, aside from diet and exercise and PT.
Right. Christy says, what is a great exercise for sciatica in the lower back?
Well, that's a medical question, and sciatica, I'm not going to diagnose that or talk about it, but that sciatic nerve is pretty thick. It's like your finger, and many times it gets compressed by a muscle called the piriformis that's in your it's in your glutes, your butt. So I can't really explain it to you now, but you could maybe look up Piriformis Stretch. And there's a special stretch where you lie on your back and you cross your leg over the other leg, and you kind of draw your legs together, and that stretches that piriformis muscle a little bit. But sometimes it's a disc pushing also, and there could be other reasons. So it's not so much an exercise. You do need to talk to a medical doctor or a trained chiropractor that deals with it. Most chiropractors deal with sciatica too. Usually it's only on one side, particularly the left side, and sometimes it goes into your foot even. But it usually subsides by itself. But sometimes if it's in that piriformis, the stretching does help.
Yeah, and acupuncture can help too.
Yeah, and I've studied with Dr. Robert Martin, who invented the gravity guiding system, and he was a chiropractor and MD. So sometimes, and I'm not saying you should do this, but sometimes brachiation or hanging, where you're hanging from a pull-up bar, or Dr. Martin created the gravity guiding system, which is a bed almost you lay on, and then you invert back and forth, you oscillate. Sometimes that pulls and decompresses the spine, taking pressure off that sciatic nerve. But I would talk to a trained medical provider.
Right. And PT can also help too. That's a wonderful thing. So Marie says, JP, I know you use a type of Tower Garden. I forgot the brand. Did you compare your brand with the Tower Garden brand before you purchased it? Also, do you use it inside or outside?
Yeah, so it's Let Us Grow. And I think if Teresa's watching, she can put the link on there. I have 2 of those and I use it inside. But if you live in a warm climate, you can use it outside, and you can grow like 36, I think it's 36, depending on the size, different plants or herbs that you get. I know the company, I know their standards, I know what they do. I really appreciate they're using reclaimed plastic. So that plastic that's created was plastic that would have been in the ocean. I believe it's actually plastic from recycled milk containers, milk bottles. And I really like the company, and I like the way they grow things. And I know the owner, and I know a lot of the staff. So there wasn't another company, whatever one that you mentioned, that maybe it was Tower Grow or something. But a lot of people were liking this one better. I had seen that one in the past. This is just the one that I use that I'm enjoying. So yeah, look for the link. Teresa will probably post it if she's still listening.
Great, thank you. Christy asks, are squats good for someone with sciatic pain?
Well, no, that all depends. I mean, again, you have to talk to your doctor, because sometimes that can aggravate it for sure. One thing that generally doesn't hurt it, I can't say in your case, but I'm not saying to do it, but leg extensions, where you're sitting on a machine and you're extending your legs forward, or you're sitting on like a tall chair or a tall table and you're extending your leg forward. Sometimes you can attach a band. Generally that doesn't, because that's mainly working the rectus femoris, your thigh muscle. But anything could bother sciatica. So it's one of these things you sometimes people just let it sit for a couple weeks and see if maybe it was a disc. There's people that are walking around they get MRIs and they don't have any symptoms of a bulged disc. But when they get an MRI done, they find they have bulged disc, and it's a high percentage of the population. So some people have bulging disc, and that can put pressure on these nerves and cause that pain. And sometimes it's as simple as hanging or letting it rest, or there's some inflammation, then it goes away. But it's something that if it's lasting more than a couple of weeks, you might want to check with your physician.
Thank you. I remember JP had a long-term food storage he recommended back at Dr. Baxter Montgomery's a few years ago. I've looked, but I can't find any information on JP's site. Can you please provide the name of the company again?
Yeah, I'll have I can have Teresa post that for you. I think that company that you're talking about was EnerHealth. And that was a bucket that was like a for 40 days, and that thing would last probably about 30 years if it's unopened. Everything was sealed in 7 mil vacuum sealed in height. I think it was nitrogen flushed actually, so all the oxygen is out. That's a really good product. So yeah, I think Teresa can maybe post that too.
I saw a question here, and now I'm sorry, I don't see it. It was about wrist exercises, and maybe it was carpal tunnel. I'll keep looking. Do you know anything about the wrist, JP?
Well, yeah, but those are all medical questions.
Mhm.
To say the main problems with carpal tunnel and the issues we find with thumbs, sometimes trigger fingers and things like that, is overuse. We're just doing so much of this all day long and so much of this that never before in history have we seen that type of overuse before with our digits. And you need to give them a rest. You need to be able to have some different stretches that you can do to relieve the tension. Many times we're very strong in grasping, but extension we're not good at. And what I use is I use some exercise bands. If you can imagine taking a rubber band and putting your fingers through it and then just opening and closing, and that helps the extensor muscles. And oftentimes that's a part of the forearm that's very weak in people. But again, that would be something to talk to your PT or physical therapist about, where they can give you more accurate information. But I would say that most of the problems, and I, I'm not a physician or a physical therapist, but have to do with being overused.
Great. Well, so here's $1 million question from Christy, and I'm typing something in the chat to her. It's, where did it go? How do you stop when you feel like you're going out of control on your food, or you feel it is coming on? And I'm going to ask her if her environment is clean.
Well, one of the things to remember is you have this kind of stimulus, whether let's say it's stress, and then you have your response, which is yelling or throwing a plate or eating, right? So you have this, but in between here is where we have this time that we can make a decision. So you don't have to act prehistorically, and just go in a fit of rage or just react. You have a pause. It's kind of like in music. You just don't have constant strumming on a guitar. There has to be a pause. And that pause is often the secret, because that is what allows you to get centered and grounded and ask yourself some questions like, why am I so hungry? You just walked into the door and you're tearing the refrigerator off. Well, if you could just stop and pause and say, what's happening here? I just had a snack at work. Well, how am I feeling? Am I feeling stressed? Am I feeling upset that I'm home now and there is nobody else with me? I live alone. Or am I upset because I got to fix meals for 5 kids and a wife or a husband, and then I got to clean the house? So there's many reasons that people react like that overeating. But I will say this: people who have a calm, stable brain generally don't. When you look at people like monks, people who are in monasteries. I can remember when I taught in India, when you're eating, you're really trained to eat quietly and not have a conversation. And so almost all the time you're just in this calm, relaxed state. And I remember saying to them that they would always ask, what was the best part of, this day? And I'd say, I got to tell you, a lot of the stuff you're teaching and stuff, this is stuff I teach or I practice. But the best thing about this, week that I've been here is I've never had to get on my cell phone. So you have to find what stresses you or causes you to get aggravated, and you have to figure that out. But always taking a pause and taking a couple deep breaths and trying to do some introspection is one of the first things we need to do.
Well, see, I've typed to her twice. I don't know if she's still on, but I asked her if her environment's clean, because I feel like if you have a clean environment, you really can't hurt yourself. What are you going to do? Eat an extra sweet potato?
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, I always tell clients all the time, I'd rather have you overeat on something that's, healthy than something that's bad, bad. But I also don't want you to the advanced level of UWL. We also just don't want you to overeat in general. But if you have to overeat, yeah, of course, overeat on potatoes or some salad or vegetables. But eventually you want to get to the point where you're calm and stable and you don't need to overeat, because overeating still is not solving the problem that you have over here. You're eating 10 potatoes and now you feel better. Serotonin's kicking in, your brain's feeling better. But I got news for you. This problem, still there. The 6 kids, the husband or the wife, or the dirty house, or financial problems, or whatever the problem, it's still there. You're not addressing it. So ultimately, yes, of course, have a clean environment. That's one of the main things we teach in UWL, is having the clean environment, for sure. But trying to get the issue fixed, it's kind of like a marital problem. You just can't go out, say, I'm going to go out to the movies so I don't have to be home with my husband or wife. That's how we keep happy. Nah, that's not a long-term solution.
He says the environment is not clean, LOL. So
yeah, well, that's not going to work for that. That even wouldn't work for someone like AJ, you know.
no. Oh my
And
God. It wouldn't even work for Goldhammer, he says. I mean,
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, AJ, why don't you tell the story about how when you would make your, I don't know what you call them, but those muffins, right? You know, and then you'd have to leave them in the refrigerator and you're always thinking about them.
yeah, that, people think I'm so extraordinary. The only secret I tell you is that I have a clean environment. And since January 2nd, 2012, not a drop, not a morsel, not a crumb of anything hyperpalatable or non-compliant comes in the house. And that's the secret. But I would think it's like Dr. Lyle has said, work harder on your environment than you do yourself, and have a session with Dr. Lyle to figure out how you can negotiate a clean environment. That's where you need, that's what you need to do. There is no magic, guys.
Yeah, you know, if you don't sanitize that environment, then you're gonna be in big trouble, because it's gonna be banging on your brain, that piece of cake that's in the refrigerator that's not yours. It's your husband's or your wife's or your kids. But you know, when you have stress and issues in your life, you're gonna be thinking about the antidote, which you think is the piece of cake. But of course, it only short-term pleasure, but ultimately long-term pain.
Yep. I mean, you can have a session with Dr. Lyle every day, but without a clean environment, I don't think he's going to be able to help you either. Yep. All right. So Anne has a question. Where did it go? My feed moves really fast. I'm so sorry. But where did it go? You saw what I saw. Let's see. Okay. Sorry. Where did it go? Well, I'll just read a nice comment. JP is brilliant. These are great questions people are asking. I agree. Gosh, it moves so fast. Anne, where is that question from Anne? All right, give me a second. Maybe you can just sing a song, JP. Do you like to sing?
A couple other things. Just remember, you know, the core of what I teach and what I have taught forever, and the core of everything with my clients is self-love and self-compassion. All the tips and tricks in the world are helpful, but you won't need them when you have that self-love. Because it's just kind of like if you have a child that's allergic to peanuts, and someone says, hey, if your kids eat the peanuts, I'll give you $100. It's like, what? You're not going to do anything to harm your child. You're not going to allow your child to go to a birthday party that's a peanut party, because you know it's going to harm your child. But when you have that same love and same care for yourself, you're not going to put yourself in situations that are going to harm you or set you up for disaster. Okay. So that's, you know, the last 2 chapters of my book, The Pillars of Health. When Marina and I wrote it, the one thing that I wanted was the whole book to be those 2 chapters, because they're all on love and compassion. It's called The Universal Antidote, which is love and compassion. And that's what I want you guys to really try to focus more on. It's great you focus on your diet and your environment and your exercise and all that, but until you get that self-love, you know, that's the core of everything. And I'm not saying the other things you don't need, but you could walk through the valley of death, you know, and you don't have to fear any evil, because you have that self-love. You're not going to be tempted. Ethical vegans can go into a slaughterhouse or a pastry place that's not vegan, and we're not tempted, because that's not something that we would ever support, because it's not loving, it's not kind. And so when you start seeing the world that way, hey, those chocolate chips, whether they're vegan or not, or this or that, is not something you want to support, it's not as challenging anymore. So try to keep working on that self-love and self-compassion. Very, very important, especially in the world that we have today. We need more love, less violence.
Yeah, thank you. Anne says, how long should a weighted vest be worn, and should it be worn on long walks?
Well, that's a great question. Remember, when somebody's overweight, especially heavily overweight, they have a weighted body vest on all the time. They don't need a vest. A weighted vest is important for bone density, but you have to start out slowly. You want to get a vest that you can add the weights in. So they're like, let's say ½ a pound each. They're like little metal tubes, or they're little like sandbags. You can add them in, because you don't just go wearing a 25-pound weight vest and you have poor, let's say, erector spinae or back muscles, and then your posture is going to throw you forward, and then you're going to have problems. So you start out slow. You make sure you keep erect posture. And I would only start on walking around the house for 5-10 minutes a day, and then build up that way. And then once you're able to do that for ½ hour to hour, then you can start maybe going for short walks with it. And what you can do is you can go for, say, 20-minute walk eventually, take the vest off, put it back at your house, and then go for another 20-minute walk. Continue it. You don't have to wear it the whole time. But it does help with bone density. But the negative of a weight vest, in my opinion, is it does cause compression. It's kind of like if you wear a bowling ball in your head all day. At the end of the day, your spine has been compressed. So you have to do some stretching and elongation exercises to open up that spine again, because that's not natural to have that compression all the time. We have enough compression with a 13-pound ball on our head, which is our head, pushing all day long. And that's why you're going to be shorter at the end of the day, because you've been compressed.
Great. And here's a question from, it's about nutritional yeast. Anita, what's the deal 50-50 with professionals? I don't think it's 50-50. I think really the only one that's really against it is Dr. Goldhammer. And I know that Dr. Furman says that if you're going to eat it, it has to be unfortified because he doesn't want all those extra vitamins in it. I know that there are people, I just posted an article from Dr. Goldhammer, one of the reasons he doesn't like it. I know that there are people with certain GI conditions that shouldn't have it. And he also says it's a very caloric, highly processed food, not found in nature. And I find that a lot of times it makes people overeat. That's been my experience because it just makes things taste so much better. I know that it gives me terrible GI symptoms, but I don't have a strong opinion on it for people. So what's your thoughts on Mooch?
Well, if somebody's telling me they're going to use nutritional yeast to eat more broccoli and brown rice, load it on. But, as you get more and more into the UWL program, obviously it might be something you want to avoid. It's kind of similar to MSG, where it can cause some issues, maybe in large amounts with cognitive functioning. Obviously you don't, Dr. Furman, of course, when you mentioned he's talking about the vitamins and supplementation, he's specifically talking about the synthetic folic acid that's added to it, because when you're taking in fortified yeast that is synthetic folic acid, and then you're eating cereal with folic acid, taking a multiple vitamin, then you can run into an issue. But again, I'm having shades of gray with my clients. I allow them to, or encourage them to have those things if it's going to allow them to eat healthier foods. Even though we don't encourage oil, if somebody said, look, I can't eat a salad without oil, I won't. I said, well, gosh, then go ahead and put oil on. Could you spray it on instead? Instead of pouring it on, could you spray it? So, I think it's good, better, and best. Try, do your very best to have the best, but, whatever's going to take to eat a salad and green leafy vegetables, do it.
Great. Well, this has been great, JP. Any words of wisdom for people approaching Thanksgiving, because you know how hard it can be?
I would just say the most important thing is that remember that this is a Thanksgiving. This is a time to be thankful and grateful for what we have. And that goes for everything. That goes for all the people, the planet, the animals, and just see what you can do to extend your gratitude to others, whether they're living beings, humans, or they're living animals, or the planet, and try to go that extra mile. And then after Thanksgiving, try to say, I'd like to make today Thanksgiving. And then the next day, say, I'd like to make the next day Thanksgiving. Make Thanksgiving 365 days a year with love and kindness to all beings and all expressions of life. And that includes yourself.
Very beautifully said. So I wish I'll be live Thanksgiving, guys. We're doing a cook along, but I hope you have a very healthy holiday. JP, happy holidays to you.
Thank you, everybody. And check us out on livingwithharmony.org. And also, if you're on Instagram, we post once or twice a week. So you'll get a lot of good ideas there. And then you can just take a look. I think Teresa will post some links to some of my Zoom series too.
Great. Thanks. Take care, everybody. And hopefully you'll come back tomorrow at 11 a.m. when Chef Karen Calabrese is going to be making a raw vegan cheesecake. Be well, everyone.